All right, thank you everyone for gathering with us as we talk today. This is our third meeting for the Kentucky Coalition for Advancing Education. Once again, my name is Toni Cons-Tatman. I am the Chief Communications Officer here at the Kentucky Department of Education. Each of you have been selected to be a member of the statewide coalition as we look to examine what is working and what we might improve about Kentucky education as it exists today, and how we might envision educational opportunities for the next generation, and how we might hold ourselves accountable to the high promise of offering a quality education to each and every Kentucky child over the next couple of years. We also want to thank each of you who are tuning in virtually on the KDE Media portal and will follow along with us on this important work. I would also like to mention that we do have a button on the Kentucky Department of Education's website where you can also follow along on the work there, which links to all of our previous meetings, as well as news releases and information about the coalition work. Before we get into today's particulars, I would like to introduce our Commissioner and Chief Learner, Dr. Jason E. Glass, to provide some opening thoughts for tonight's meeting. Dr. Glass.
Thanks, Toni. It's great to see all of you and connect with you. I'm sorry that I wasn't able to stay on for the full meeting last week to hear all the perspectives. I was triple booked, so going from meeting to meeting, but I do have some time to listen in this evening and hear the work that you're doing. But I did get a report from what you were able to work on last week, and I'm excited about continuing that this week. Today, we're going to focus on two more dimensions that have emerged in the listening tours and in our conversations around the state, and they are accountability and assessment. I know those are often topics that are talked about in how we change education. They're things that we need to talk about here. But we need to think about how we can make accountability assessment more of a local priority and consider also how we continue those issues of comparability, or looking at one school versus another, one district versus another, one state versus another. So we look forward to getting your perspectives and thoughts on those two issues, accountability and assessment. Through all this work, hopefully you will now have been invited into this co-creation process, so that everyone is working together. We wanted this effort to really be one that heard from voices of Kentuckians and drove our vision going forward based on the perspectives of Kentuckians. So that co-creation process you're taking part of and pulling other people into through your empathy interviews as well. So we want it to be about that co-creation, listening, hearing from the voices of Kentuckians, and developing those perspectives going forward. So with that, I'll turn it over to the team from CIE. I'm looking forward to hearing the conversation tonight and taking part where I can. Thank you.
Hi, everyone. It's Donnie here again, and just want to do a quick run through of the agenda just so that we have a sense of where we're going today. We've already heard the welcome, the opening remarks. We'll talk a little bit now about our purpose and goals moving forward. And then we have a wonderful connection activity from members of our own community. Then we'll go into the dimensions of assessment and accountability, comparability and prioritization, as Dr. Glass mentioned. And then we'll talk about how we collectively make decisions here in our group. And then we will go into the finalizing and reviewing user profiles portion of our work tonight. And then this is more of something we'll likely hold for next time around building these storylines and headlines for the current state of Kentucky Education Report. And then we'll close. And I'll hand it over to myself, and just thinking through what we are building as we walk through the coalition's products. Now, at this point in a coalition like this, when we've been very deep in the work together, it's easy to lose sight of where we're trying to go and why. I'm going to pull up for a moment in the hopes that we can pull our focus to the horizon, and I'll be sharing a mock-up of the first of 4 final products that we will collectively write and share with the Commonwealth. In the chat, I invite you to share connections you're seeing to the work of meeting 1 and 2, what gets you excited, and what questions and suggestions you have. So as you can see here, this is what the first part of the current state of education in Kentucky report could look like. And we're charged to create that by the commissioner, as he noted at the beginning of this conversation. This is what it could look like, and we just want to acknowledge that this is going to be an evolving thing as we contribute all of our brain power to it. And in an introduction to a report like this, we would want to tell the story of us. How did we as a coalition come together, and how did we branch across the length and breadth of the Commonwealth to hear people's stories? We also want to give people heads up about the structure of the report, since it's unlikely to be like any report they've ever seen before. We would name that there are going to be multiple user profiles for each stakeholder, multiple profiles for students, families, teachers, etc. And we would give people a heads up about the storylines that describe how each of these different stakeholders experiences the current system. Next slide, please. And just want to share one section and what it could look like. This one's just for students. This would be just their section of the report. How do students experience the current system? We would have multiple user profiles across the top. 4 is an arbitrary number, by the way. And then below those profiles are the key storylines of how students experience the system now. A sentence or two that describes the big takeaway of what we are learning from our empathy interviews, what we're learning from each other, and from the data from the listening tour. So this, what you see highlighted in gold there, could be one big storyline that students need more focus on their unique needs and interests because they feel like the system is trying to get performance from them rather than develop them as people. And the paragraph below represents just, building out some of those ideas that are held in that storyline. And the report would end after it goes through each of those different user types, students, teachers, administrators, and so on, and would go into what's true about the whole system. What are some common themes that connect the patterns of how different stakeholders experience the system now? So now that you have a sense of what the current state report will look like, I would imagine, I want you to imagine that if we flipped all of the challenges that people are experiencing with the system, how those might become the vision for a new system. And that is the second report. And if we're clear with ourselves that nobody yet knows how to create that system totally, then we have to learn and co-create together. That's the third part, the learning agenda that will guide the L3s. And a guidebook about actually how to do that kind of reciprocal learning and co-creation, that's the final product. So those 4 things together are our total set of products that we're charged to create. But wanted to just outline what that can look like for all of you, just so that we know where we are heading, what we're trying to build, and hopefully to provide some relevance of what today's work is going to look like. All right, I'll hand it over to Gretchen just to talk through a little bit about some of the things we heard from the survey that you did last time.
Thanks, Donnie, and hi, everybody. So as a reminder, we are in this group that we're in right now in the coalition. We're trying to build some collaboration muscles and practice some habits that we hope will lead to another one of those products. In addition to the current state product, we have this product of trying to offer some guidance to local communities, to the L3 communities who will engage in work similar to this at home. And so we're trying to practice some habits. And here are a few: inclusion of many voices, co-creation with one another, and reciprocity, being reciprocal in our sort of trust and engagement and listening and responsiveness to one another. And so we asked you last time these questions at the end. How did it feel to empathize with users different than yourself? Did you have a moment where you felt skeptical of another person's viewpoint? Is there anything else you want to let us know about the coalition meeting? And I'm about to go through some slides right now very quickly, but you have the link to the full slide deck, the correct one, not the first one I posted, but the second one. And we'd love for you to dig into more of the detail of what's here, but I'm going to go quickly just to help us all get a flavor of how we felt we were doing as a group on some of these things last time. So this first question, how did it feel to empathize with users different than yourself? And remembering we only heard from 22 of us, so this isn't everybody, but among those 22, most people had positive responses to this question. As an example, I felt it was very involved and personal. I'm grateful to be here in this space and to be working with passionate people. We also heard from some folks who had kind of mixed feelings. About 27% of people had something that seemed mixed. Maybe something like, it's uncomfortable at first. I'm hyper conscious that I'm culturally sensitive. It will become more natural with exposure and time. And then a couple of folks, 9%, who expressed more of a challenging tone, either just saying point blank, it's challenging, or did not connect on that level due to lack of conversation from others in my group. Then we went on to ask about that moment, if you felt skeptical and what you did about it. And we have a couple of slides of these. I'll share the first couple here. Sometimes I'm so shocked by people's viewpoint, I have to remind myself that everyone's experiences are different and that this coalition is only strengthened by a diverse story collection. And we have these other examples and these here too, which again, please view the slides to look at more examples of these. What did we do when we felt skeptical? Last one here, I found myself wanting to supply some answers. I held back. But in one interview, the parent had a lot of misconceptions. After the interview, we had an open conversation. I was able to share some of those facts that had been misconstrued. And then anything you want us to know about today's coalition meeting. And we had some constructive feedback and then some positive feedback, and I'll share a few of these. I'm shocked that when talking about how to build community, the need to reach out to families and students in their own language has barely been mentioned or taken into consideration. It's difficult to relate to people when they can't show themselves or never show themselves on camera. At least in groups, they should show themselves, people traveling being the obvious safety exception to that feedback. It's difficult to participate in the abstract when we do a lot of work that's concrete, and asking for slides in advance, which we will do a better job of. I think we just shared them with you today. Positive feedback, love the process. Going to use it in our admin meeting. Thank you for intentionally planning and leading this work. Challenging, but time well spent. Challenging, but eye-opening. I feel like I'm in the zone of proximal development. Grateful to be chosen and be here. So those are some themes. And, maybe keep in mind, what we're trying to do and how we're trying to be good collaborators, even though we're on Zoom and it's a little strange, as we think about the purpose for today. Donnie, you want to pick that up?
Was speaking so vociferously into my mute button. And so we'll be, as we noted before, focusing in on comparability and prioritization. Two big ideas that dictate the system as we know it now. And we will also be spending the majority of our time in finalizing those user profiles so that we can really build out that part of the report. And then if we get to it, we'll start focusing in on the key narratives about the current state of education that builds from that. All right. And here are our community agreements, and just looking at the data from the last time, if we can, I would say we share our video if possible, so that we can continue to build that connection, particularly in small groups. And we continue to acknowledge many forms of expertise, because really hearing from and looking across lines of expertise are going to be a really important part of today's activity. And I am just so thrilled and excited about the incredible leadership that runs deep in this coalition. So to do our connection activity today, I want to introduce Bren, Tracy, and Sarah. Take it away.
Thanks, Donnie, and thank you, Bren and Tracy, for jumping in and being willing to help as well with facilitating this activity. So as Donnie and Gretchen have mentioned so far today, we just want to get back here in our third meeting. We thought that it was especially important to ground ourselves in our purpose, not only as a collective group, but as individuals who said yes to being part of this coalition. And so whether you were recruited by a KDE staff member or a local principal reached out to you as a parent or community member and asked you to join into this group, or whether you were an interested community member who filled out the application willingly yourself, each and every one of us who are on the screen today said yes. And so as we move into the work today, let's just take a moment to reflect on ourselves, our past experiences, those that we love and know dearly, and really ground this work in why we said yes. So if you could go to the next slide, please. So I'm going to put myself on the spot here for just a moment. That adorable little fourth grader there would be me. And I show that image as an example as we lead you into our Thorns and Roses activity today. In just a moment, when you're put into a breakout group, if that's possible, we would like you to think about when the moment that you said yes, you likely thought of someone who needed you to, whether it be a past version of yourself or your child, your nephew, your niece, a family friend, a student that you have. So think back to maybe the person who crossed your mind in the moment that you said yes to being part of this group. We'll post a link in the chat to a document, and we just ask that you reflect on some thorns and roses of their educational experience. So this connects in a way to the user profiles that we've talked about, but we really wanted to take this back to a more personal level so that we can ground ourselves and remember why we individually have shown up today. So if you would in your group, just have a casual conversation about those people. It could be a past version of yourself. My example that you'll see on the document is the fourth grade version of me. I was identified as a gifted and talented student. Unfortunately, a system that valued my test score failed to recognize at the time that I was gifted in English and language arts and not so much in math. So when I was force-fed into a system of advanced courses in ELA and math, I started to get discouraged and I failed and I tripped over myself and I created this image where now into my late 20s, I still am just not a math person. So my experience very early on of being told that I was my test score or my potential for a high test score really fed into a lot of negative impacts for me as I continued to grow. So that would be a thorn in my past experience. We're also going to ask you to reflect on the roses for this person's experience as well. Out of that thorn came a very positive relationship with a tutor in my local community, school community. Otherwise, I would have never had that opportunity. I grew, I became resilient. I overcame those obstacles. My grade wasn't an A that I was used to, but it was an opportunity that I learned from. But as I look toward the roses of that experience, if I was part of a system that had seen me as an individual for my strengths and my areas of growth, perhaps I would have grown into that math student that I could have been if I had more accurately been placed in a course or in a track that would have met my needs. So that was just a personal example of what you might talk about in your group today. Again, it does not have to be yourself, but someone that you know personally that, again, made you say yes to being part of this work. So we will drop that, if we've not already done so, into the chat. And when you're put into some breakout groups, you can jot down some takeaways. There are directions for you in case you forget on your way over to the breakout groups. But just some key takeaways. If someone's story really resonates with you, that's fine to focus on. We'll come back and share at the end, or you can jot down a few thoughts from each person who shares in your group. So if we could have someone facilitate those breakouts, we will come back and share. Donnie, Gretchen, I'm not sure what makes sense time-wise for you all, but take the time that we need so that we can get to the part today.
I think we have time for 7-minute breakouts.
We lost Tracy. Oh. Okay. I'll step in, and Bryn, if you're with us, feel free as well. Just to take a moment to reflect and come together as a group. What were some takeaways? If you can raise your hand, I'm not sure, I'm less familiar with Zoom. Raise your hand or just pop on with your video and mic and share some key takeaways, anything that resonated with you that you learned from your group member or maybe even yourself from that activity.
Sarah, I'm on here. I don't know if you can you hear me? Yeah, okay. This is Tracy, and my group, we noticed that what the schools offered, depending on what the child really needed, was sometimes not always what that child excelled in. And then we also discussed the pressure of testing in the assessment system and the thorn that creates, and that it doesn't always make things seem very positive for the school system and for the students involved. So those were the types of things that we discussed. I did share with them, I don't know how many of you can actually see my screen, but I've got a picture behind me and it's my two littles. And those are the reason why I chose to join this coalition and signed up for it. I have a daughter who is headed up to 8th grade and a son who is going into middle school. And my true goal is to make our county that I work in and any other school system that we can have an impact on have a better opportunity for kids. One that's not necessarily riddled with anxiety about a particular number, but one that enhances everyone's strengths and gives everybody an opportunity to shine based on what they can do well and can enjoy, and kind of bring back a little bit more joy into our schools. So, and then I made Robbie Fletcher promise me that he would speak up too.
After being nominated there, I will share from our group. Thank you, Superintendent Morrissey. What really centered in our group was the fact that a lot of times, whether it be state testing or just our personal experiences, sometimes we got labels. Sometimes we've been put into categories, which we may or may not have been able to be successful. Particularly in my situation, a good example of the student that we want to work towards is, the Lawrence County school system exited that persistently low achieving status a few years ago. And we were feeling really good about ourselves. And then we had a student that decided he wanted to drop out right around the same time. He talked to our chief academic officer, and then the question came up, you have great test scores, but are you relevant for every student? And in particular, this student said he spoke with me. He wanted to drop out, get his GED, and go straight into the workforce. And I was like, how are we not serving this student? So what happened was he basically said, I don't need the remedial math class. I don't have the ACT score to get the college readiness, but I do have value. And that was a tough conversation with a student who wound up dropping out. We did talk with him a lot about what can we do better, and to move past that labeling students, but finding out what their strengths are and what can we do to cultivate that strength and make them a better child. So if we can do that for every single student in our district, that's our goal. So we really focused in on personalized learning, getting away from the labels that we're so used to in accountability to what makes you a better person, what makes you happy, but also what makes you successful, and how can we push you, how can we challenge you, and how can we make ourselves better for it. Again, not just one student, but it was one student that made us to think about that. Dr. Fletcher, is your school system relevant? And that's our drive.
That's great. Thank you so much. What a powerful reflection on our purpose here. So connected to the charge that Commissioner Glass has shared with us and our aims and aspirations for the coalition overall. I'm going to hand it over to Paul. Well, first, if you know how to do this, there's a reaction button at the bottom of your Zoom, and you can actually react to just the wonderful leadership from so many people in this coalition. Thank you so much to Bren, Tracy, and Sarah for leading us through that incredible reflection. Thanks to them. And I'll hand it over to Paul.
Thanks, Donnie. I also want to thank Bren, Tracy, and Sarah for sharing their bouquet of roses with us this afternoon. Now we're going to dive back into the dimensions of accountability and assessment that we started to discuss last week. Over the last 2 decades, the way we have thought about accountability and assessment for schools has largely been driven by core needs of both society and the system. How can we have a fair system across all of our schools and communities where every student has access to equal opportunities to learn? These foundational constructs are noble in intent, but as Dr. Glass has pointed out, we should ask if they are actually serving our purpose well today. During the same period of the last 20 years, many schools and districts have attempted a number of different approaches to improvement and innovation, prioritizing different methods and expectations based on their community needs, their system, and their children's learning needs, with some emerging promising methods that we might all want to take a closer look at. Today, we're going to drill down just a little bit into how we think about these 2 new dimensions, comparability and prioritization. First, I'm going to share a small piece of a larger presentation by Susan Lyons, a psychometrician formerly with the National Center for Assessment and now a private consultant. At a recent national session on innovative assessment that our center held in May, Susan had some provocative things to say about comparability, questioning where our current conceptions come from and raising questions about new ways to consider the issue. After sharing those thoughts, we will hear from 2 of our coalition members from 2 different Kentucky districts about some emerging priorities that they have been working on, the Portrait of a Graduate and the Digital Backpack, respectively. We go to the next slide, please. These next 3 slides are from Susan Lyons, taken directly from her presentation to our national group. Our notions of comparability and psychometrics privilege a single dominant interpretation of the construct and demands a single acceptable form of behavioral evidence to demonstrate achievement on that construct. A particular way of being and knowing and doing is codified in how items are developed to measure some assumed to be universal construct. The adequacy of the one-size-fits-all presumption of standardized assessment is not only challenged by the science of cognitive psychology, but this way of instrumentalizing the cultural understanding and the values of the larger society only perpetuates the dominant perspectives within that society. Next slide, please. Rather than using standardization as our pathway to score comparability, we may instead choose to imagine a world in which we define comparability in terms of the degree in which the assessment allows for each student to meaningfully and authentically engage with the content to demonstrate their knowledge and skills. From a socio-cultural perspective, a student is not presumed to have had the same opportunity to demonstrate their knowledge just because they are exposed to the same stimulus or work. Instead, the assessment environment must afford opportunities that attend to the learner's particular contexts and background. As Joan Herman and Linda Cook hypothesize, by better responding to students' identity, culture, interests, and the interactive processes through which students develop capability, variations in the surface features of an assessment, such as holding students to the same criteria but permitting some choice, may yield a better and fairer estimate of student capability. Next slide, please. One example of a large-scale assessment program that challenges traditional conceptualizations of comparability is the AP Art portfolios, where students develop portfolios of their work over the course of the year to be evaluated using a common set of rating rubrics. Students' writing accompanies the submissions, grounding the art in the local materials, processes, and ideas that inform the work. The meaning of scores is constantly mediated through conversations among the teacher scorers about how to evaluate and rate the immense diversity in submissions. Bob Mislevy characterizes the AP art portfolios as more of a social phenomenon than an exercise in measurement. But if we are to truly interrogate the assumptions of construct uniformity, cultural neutrality, decontextualization, unidimensionality, quantitative objectivity, and many others underlying our current educational measurements, it may be more useful to recast all of our efforts in educational assessment as social phenomena rather than exercises in scientific measurement of mental attributes. Now Sarah Lynch will introduce a discussion on these issues as they are arising for two coalition members at the local level. Sarah?
Thanks, Paul. I really appreciate that. Like, I am not a psychometrician, and I really appreciate you sharing and kind of doing a deep dive into the nerdy stuff of the things we accept. And when we talk about comparability or comparability, implied in that is also a naming of things that we are prioritizing. Like, what are our priorities that we're going to compare between students, between schools, between districts? And a state system like the Commonwealth makes those decisions about what we're going to prioritize. But there are also examples of districts around the country, including districts here in Kentucky, that are having local conversations about what are our local priorities, about what we want to assess, what we want to grow, and what we want to celebrate in our students and our communities. So it's a great honor to introduce and invite up to the Zoom spotlight Dina Dossett, who's the Chief Accountability Officer at Jefferson County Schools, and Susan Dougal, who's the Chief Academic Officer at Shelby County Schools. Hi, Susan. Hi, Dina. Are you spotlighted? There we go. Thank you. So Susan, this is the third time I think I've put you on the spot in some sort of public process. So thank you for accepting the invitation. And Dina, thank you so much. So we'll take a quick walk through the next slide and see that both Jefferson County and Shelby County have gone through a process where they've named a set of skills that are important to their school system, but also to their community. So in Shelby County, they call it a portrait of a graduate, where you see these skills. I won't test your eyesight, but they talk about being an inspired innovator, a critical thinker, a responsible collaborator, a lifelong learner, an effective communicator, and a global citizen. And then if we look at the Jefferson County backpack of student success skills, did I get that right, Dina? The backpack of student success skills. You see similar themes: effective communicator, emerging innovator, prepared and resilient learner, globally and culturally competent citizen, and productive collaborator. What I would love to do is have you all share your stories in the community with the coalition members here about the development, the instruction, and the assessment of each of these local prioritizations. So we'll start. So Dina, we'll start with you in Jefferson County. Can you tell us the story of how the backpack was developed with the community members in Jefferson County?
Sure, absolutely. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah, you're great.
So before I begin, I just want to give a shout out to Dr. Carmen Coleman, who's our Chief Academic Officer. I told her I was doing this today, and I said, of course, I'm not going to do it justice for what, her role in leading this work, but I'll try to wrap it up for you all in terms of what we're doing here in Jefferson County. So really this came about and we've talked about this in our earlier meetings, that we've got data in spades that the system that we have now isn't working for all of our students. And so it started with conversations around, what if we approach school differently? What if we focus on creating engaging, interesting, inspiring learning, putting your end to focusing on so heavily what's hard for kids, so that kids aren't sitting passively in classrooms with low-level tasks that are unrelated or uninteresting to them. So we started by having lots of conversations with our community, with our teachers, with our district and school staffs around just 3 basic questions. What are the most essential skills for success? What kinds of experiences will lead to those outcomes? And when and where in your school do students get these types of experiences, and do all students have those opportunities? So those were the 3 questions that we really focused in on, and that's where the backpack of success skills was born, in terms of those 5 areas that bubbled up in terms of what are the most essential skills for success here in Jefferson County.
Wonderful, thank you. Susan, what's the story of where the graduate profile came from in Shelby? You all have been on an extraordinary journey and lots of innovation. So where did the profile come in?
About 5 years ago, we were nearing the end of a strategic leadership plan and had realized that much of our measurement of student success was around standardized scores, interim assessment, those kinds of things. So at that point in time, we decided to go through a design thinking process, and it took about a year. And we started the design thinking and the empathy phase, and those early user profiles with educators and students, and it was really school-based, and went through several of those phases until we got to the test phase. And that's when we took it to our community and parents. And when we got to that phase, we were really proud of what we've done. Thought we had a great product. And when we took it out for the community and got their feedback through a structure, a meeting that we brought many people together, we found out we had created a profile of a student instead of a profile of a graduate. We were saying what good students do, not what our community needed from our graduates. So once we got their feedback, we made the revisions, and that's where our current profile stands. Then we wrote I have a plan here. At the year after that, we spent writing the next strategic leadership plan that really showed what the journey was to get to the place where our students could defend those competencies. And then we spent a lot of time in our community with a profile after it was created. We went to all the services organizations, the chamber. We had town halls. Our board members each led a town hall in their elected district for parents to talk about the profile. We had a full page ad in our local newspaper, a magazine article in our local magazine. So we wanted to make sure it was community owned and not just school-based. So that's kind of how it was started about 5 years ago.
I love that. So Susan, a few weeks ago, I was hanging out with one of your colleagues, Rebecca Martin, and talking about the profile. And what I loved is we came to this point where the profile of a graduate in Shelby isn't just like these aspirational statements you have for your students. It's a statement about what's the best of your current communities. It's like the profile is alive in the best of Shelby County. And I just love the way you guys have approached that, sort of owning it with your community. So Dina, I am so into the story of what you all have done to take this backpack and make it alive in Jefferson County. Can you tell us a little bit about, so once you named the skills in the backpack, how are students then provided the opportunities to fill their backpack? What are the ways that they have the opportunities to grow the skills you guys named?
Right. So it really does start with those skills for the backpack. And students, it's literally a virtual electronic backpack, and students are adding artifacts, what we call artifacts, to their backpack in these 5 different skills. And so, and it's really, again, kindergartners through 12th graders do this work. And so we're using those skills as our key instructional approach. And so what kinds of experiences will lead to those outcomes? So teachers are using that, and students are using that, those skills to design their work so that they can show artifacts in these 5 areas. So we used to have lots of conversations around how to make work more meaningful and rigorous. And now that those kind of questions go away because it's all centered around those 5 success skills. And we knew we were onto something when we had a 3rd grader say, worksheets won't make a good backpack artifact. So you're onto it when like a 3rd grader gets it like that. Like worksheets aren't going to cut it anymore.
I love that in thinking and making a connection back to some of the thoughts that Paul just shared around comparability is like looking at an assessment, not just of the student's skill, but of the opportunity that the student had to grow that skill, right? And like a different orientation to how you guys are creating learning opportunities. So
I was just going to say it really is just about the journey too. So we'll talk about this in our next question, but when it comes to the defenses, students have that opportunity. It's never necessarily, it's not a finished product. There's always growth that can happen with those artifacts.
Oh, I love that. So Susan, as Shelby County is a member of the Assessment for Learning project, learning community that I'm a part of, I'm really love the story of how you guys have integrated the opportunities to grow your profile of graduate skills. So it's not just your 12th grade year cramming the skills in, but how it's built into your whole system. Share a little bit how students are provided opportunities to grow in the profile skills.
Well, what we realize is that these are things that we all agree upon, and no one argues that this is not what we want kids to be. But if we're just going to say it and not plan for it and being intentional about it, we're going to get the same results. So we have tried to support our teachers in creating learning opportunities and tasks that lend themselves to produce the artifacts and the evidence, much like Jefferson County. Even in our planning documents, we have started to integrate, when you're planning a lesson, you have your academic standard, but you also have which of the competencies of the profile are you intentionally teaching and assessing through that. And our project-based learning opportunities, a huge part of that revolves around that profile lens as well. In some classrooms, you can go in and not only are there learning targets for the standards, but also for the competencies. So it's just that shift in intentionality and realizing that the adults have to create the environment for this to happen. And it sometimes could happen by accident, but we can ensure it when we are intentional about that planning.
Awesome. Intentional and prioritizing the skills. So lastly, we're going to a very quick 1-minute answer, which is going to be hard because I know y'all do an incredible job with this. But so now that you've named the skills, now that you're building the opportunities to grow the skills, how are you assessing these skills in Jefferson and Shelby?
So in Jefferson, we have what we call defenses, and they happen at 5th grade, 8th grade, and 12th grade. And that is an opportunity for students to showcase artifacts in their backpack and talk about their journey and what worked well, what they struggled with. And really what we've learned from this is, we know our students like we never did before. We realize that they can do more than we ever imagined possible. And we're talking about evidence of learning beyond just test scores. So we're letting students show us what they know in so many different ways. We do have performance outcomes that we've established for each grade level around the skills, but we intentionally didn't start with a district-wide rubric because we wanted to have that intentional kind of productive struggle that happened. And so this has really grown kind of organically over the last few years, but that's where we are right now.
Wonderful. Susan?
Well, we also have performance outcomes that are written for grades 2, 5, 8, and 12, and continuums that kind of flow up to those performance outcomes. We also have established district single point rubrics, so kids know if they're there or not yet, and that's how we provide feedback on that is around those single point rubrics. And the assessment themselves usually come through exhibitions, and we call the interim, unit-based, those things that happen throughout the year, the exhibitions, and that's where we can provide feedback, produce artifacts. And then at the end too, we have our defenses are also at the 5th, 8th, and 12th grade levels, where we have some requirements at each grade level of what students must defend.
Oh, thank you all. All right, so you can use, to the other coalition members, use your reaction buttons, and also just give a flood in the chat of gratitude for sharing these stories. Dina, Susan, I just think these are such, I really appreciate you all stepping up, accepting the invitation and sharing the stories. And if you're curious, we'll continue to share resources and stories about what's going on in Shelby and Jefferson for such extraordinary work. But I heard conversations about getting to know your students better, like things that we know, the skills that are important, and there's no debating it, creating that opportunity. And also thinking about these exhibitions as rites of passage, which is a very different experience than assessments as rites of passage that we think of now. So thank you all. Thank you. So the next slide. Paul, do you want to wrap up and give the reflection, or go ahead?
Yes, so I just asked folks to read through this slide, and I'll just say this last question. What would it feel like to be in a system that fairly balances comparability and prioritization of local needs? We heard several voices just now talking about some exciting work. How can we build and balance a new kind of system that would honor the work that they are raising? Next slide, please. I'm going to hand it over to Gretchen, who's going to speak to decision-making in the next set of slides.
Thanks, Paul. Sorry, I was fussing to unmute myself. My mute button was hidden. So decision-making. So today, when you get in your groups, you are going to have your first chance in a small group as part of this coalition to make some shared decisions, which is that you're going to work on these profiles, and you'll see in a minute here, you're going to have a few of them, and you have some work that you might do with them to tune them up. And when you have one that you think is ready, you think it's like a profile that should be considered by the whole coalition to be one of the profiles included in that report that Donnie showed you earlier, you're going to need a way to make those decisions. And so we wanted to suggest that we try in this coalition the FIST to 5 consensus method. And so I'm just going to tell you quickly how that works. There are notes about this inside your working slides, so no need to like write down what I'm about to say about FIST to 5 because it's all there for you. The gist is this. You get a profile to the place that you think it should be, and somebody says, I think this is good. Let's vote FIST to 5. Do we think this profile is ready to share with the whole group? And then everybody votes by putting a hand up. FIST 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And this is what it means. 5 is like, I'm so excited, love it. 3 or 4 is like, I'm good with that. 1 or 2 is, I have some reservations, but not enough to stop us from moving forward. The FIST is, if it was just up to me, we would not put this forward the way it is right now. And I am prepared to say why to my group. Then when we've all shared FIST to 5s, if there are no FISTs, you move forward. If there is 1 FIST or 2 FISTs, you ask those folks to share out, why were you a FIST? If it's more than 1 FIST, then you go back to working and figure it out. If it's 1 FIST, you can move forward. Our rule inside the coalition is going to be 90% no FISTs, but your groups are so small today that that would be like a half a person for some of you. So today we'll just say no more than 1 person not feeling like they're ready to move on with your profile. So wanted to have you guys practice this today, and we'll ask you at some point about how this went and ask for some amendments to this if this process of decision-making doesn't feel like it's working, but we wanted to try that out today.
Excellent. So yeah, let's get to work. So we're about to send you off to do this really powerful task of creating these user profiles. As we noted earlier, these will be the foundation of the report that we're generating. And this is an example of what it looks like. So you have the profile name across the top. It usually is some interesting adjective that describes the person plus a name. And then you have quotes along the left side. These are quotes that you've pulled from all of the various sources. And these go together. These are the clusters that you created last time. Then there's in the center, you have the compelling needs. What does this user need from the education system that they're not currently getting? And a lot of times you can create these by using the important because statements. And so you can kind of turn those into compelling needs oftentimes. And then on the right, you have important insights. So what do we now know about these folks, about how they see the world, about how they think, about what they like, about what they want? And so this is a full profile. So I want to tell you a little bit about what we've done to help support this process in between the last time and now. If we could advance to the next slide, please. So since the last time, we pulled together quotes from the different Padlets. So as you likely remember, you pulled all of your empathy interviews and you pulled the most important quotes. So I have to say first, it is so incredible the job that you have all done, both with your interviews and the process of grouping and developing themes. Using each Padlet that you had last time, we created at least one profile. So we used your important because statements to start to name the most compelling needs. And then we looked across the Padlets and we noticed that some of the profiles were similar, right? Because you talk to people and those people had really similar or shared issues. And so we grouped those together and started to, what we've done is prompted you to think about how those actually might become one profile. We also saw that some of your groups had grouped by ideas and not necessarily users. So we needed to tease those apart a little bit. As a result, we held your collections of quotes together, but we suggested new teams that would allow you to bring together some of those profiles so they weren't duplicative. And we also brought a few teams together to work on profiles that were missing, school leaders, district leaders in particular, because those weren't really a part of the last process. So this is the go-to slide. This is where the action is. So what we've asked you to do, what we're going to put you into small groups to do, your mission, should you choose to accept it, is to create those user profiles and put them to the test using the big questions on the left. Does the profile describe someone who could realistically walk through your community or school? Does this represent somebody like that? Does it seem different enough from the other profiles to keep them distinct? And does it help us define needs that feel really important and different enough to understand on its own? So those are the questions you're going to test each of your profiles with. But how do you get there? And that's what's on the right. So do you merge or separate? So we've presented some groupings that kind of go together, and we're suggesting that you merge some of them. You have to decide. The power is in your hands to decide whether or not you should really merge those. And so you decide that as a group. And then once you determine whether or not you're going to keep them separate or put them together, you need to finalize the quotes. So either you combine quotes, you might sort them out or change how they're organized. And so you're going to use any additional resources that you want to help draw in new quotes as well. So you might have additional empathy interviews. You can have the Padlets from last time. You've got all of the additional quotes that you may have gathered from other sources like the listening tour. Then convert that into compelling needs. What are the things that seem to be pain points for this person that they need to be addressed? And then get down to the important insights. Like how does this user think and what do they seem to care about? Once you've got your things drafted, your user profiles drafted, use the fist to 5 approach to move it forward. You're like, boom, this one's done. We've all decided, all 5s all the way, or some mix of votes from each person. And you might find that some quotes don't have a home, and that is totally fine. But you can put those into a slide that's in your working document. So you can just drop them in there, and then we can start to look across and start to see whether or not there's some potential places for that sentiment. Okay. All right. Next slide, please. So here's one of the user profiles. You have this quote at the top that says, the speech teacher always went out of her way to learn about her son's medical condition, and the teacher adapted her speech techniques to this condition. And the important because that went with that was that the mother knew that this meant the teacher cared enough to learn about her child. From there, we can identify that this person's compelling need is that their child have teachers that care enough to learn about their children. This is the way that we're going to build our user profiles in your working group today. This is the kind of thinking that you're going to do to finish it up. You're going to be trying to convert some of the things you know are important into needs, and then you're going to try to distill down to some important insights for that person, things that you need us to know and when we read your insights, and when we read your profiles. For new teams, so there's a few groups that have either just like one profile or maybe even none. So like the school leaders and district leaders, your job is to draw quotes from the listening tour and meeting one notes. All of those links are in your working deck. And then you're going to utilize the perspectives of the coalition members in the room to construct the rest. Okay, because what we've done is load people with those experiences into those rooms, and so that's gonna be your task. Just to note something though, all of the groups are mixed because we want you to build empathy with one another. In the district leader room, there are district leaders, but there's also a teacher, and there's also a family member, and there's also a student, so that you can help people understand your perspective, right? And understand the perspectives of different points of view. Okay. Gretchen, why don't we open up just the working deck and just make sure that people can see kind of what it looks like. While she's doing that, I'll remind folks that there's at least one person in each room who should record when they go back into the small groups. And so please make sure that you do that, and we'll send you some instructions as we did last time on how to upload those. So this is an example of the group one user profile group. And you have a first front slide, who's in the team. Here are the guiding questions we've already shared. Here are the tools that you can use and download. And then you have the sample user profiles that go along with it. So in this group, we're actually not suggesting necessarily that you merge any, that they're all here and pretty good, but you need to refine them and make sure they feel distinct. You still might move some things around. You'll notice that there's a bubble right here, this gray bubble. We might suggest ... That's a good place to start. We tried to go through and give you feedback if we saw anything that we wanted to prompt you about or ask any questions about. And otherwise, just work through the tasks as we've laid out on that blue slide. The next to last slide is the FIS to 5 decision-making process. And the very last slide is the place where you put quotes that may not have another place to go. And so that we can start digging through those when we're finished.
And Donnie, just one more note on that slide. Some of you, we imagine, conducted some additional empathy interviews in this last week, because we ended by saying we may be missing some voices. You should feel free to bring those quotes with you into the work with your teams today to, further flesh out or hone in on these profiles. You also can place quotes on this slide right here if you think there are some important things that you found in that empathy interview and you want there to be a home for it. You'd like us to basically find a way to get it into a profile. We'll be doing some work between now and next week to kind of help integrate those things. So if you have other data, this is the place to also add it. It's on this slide on your Teams deck.
Okay. So we have put you into groups. It's very similar to the groups that you did the roses and thorns experience with. So you already had done a little bit of get to know you. When you go back into your rooms, we will put the folder, we're gonna put the folder right now into the chat with all of the different user profile groups. Just make sure that everybody has that. You can go ahead and open that up. When you get to your room, open up the user profile slides that go along with your group. You can see the group in the top bar when you get there, when you get to your breakout. Okay, we will be circulating around, and you can always come back into the main room if you have questions. You have about 40 minutes of work time to really dig into this. And so we're hoping that you can get to a place of making decisions about your user profiles by the end of that time. Okay, any questions before we jump in? There's been a lot of questions in the chat, which have been super helpful. Are there any questions from folks that they want to say out loud? Okay. All right, teams. We got user profiles to write. Let's go do it. All right, Lauren, ready to roll? Wonderful. Thank you all. And for those reflections, we gather data in many ways, as we would expect of our systems for our students and for our families. And this is a really wonderful wealth of insights about how this experience has been for you. And so we just want to share our gratitude for the incredible work. We know there's never enough time, but I am deeply, deeply honored and joyful about how efficiently and how effectively you've spent the time that we do have. So I'm going to hand it over to my colleague, Paul, to just speak through some next steps. And Paul, I could put up the slides. I don't know if Gretchen's able to. I can.
Right. I can pop up.
Okay. Thanks.
Great, Donnie. Thank you. And thank you to all of you for hanging in there with us for the full meeting today. Hopefully you can see that how you can, that as you complete these user profiles, that this will really help to build the report on the current state of education in Kentucky based on the listening tour and other data. Next week, we're going to continue with this work and also begin to develop storylines that will describe the vision of a new system based on the problem statements that you've been identifying over the last couple weeks. Also, based on our learnings from this process, we'll be defining a shared learning agenda for the local laboratories of learning for their work beginning this coming fall. And they're already starting to think about how they might start to integrate this work. And we'll be meeting with them shortly to discuss that. As you experience the meeting and the process today, we also ask that you put into the chat any questions or suggestions that arise for you. We will try to address them either directly or at our next meeting. We really, again, just thank you all for being here and being with us, and your continued participation as active members of this coalition will really make a difference for the future of education in Kentucky. Stay with us. We'll work with you right through the end of the month. Thank you.
And real quick before we hop, I just want to say too that I think it's likely that we after every meeting, we're always sending you sort of a synopsis of what's happened. And sometimes we've had in there some homework items, and just looking at where we're at with profiles, I think it's likely we might ask you to do some just reading of profiles between now and the next meeting, but we need to look at everybody's profiles together and really determine what kind of follow-up makes sense. But I did just want to say, be watching your email and be thinking that you might have a little bit of homework time this week, just so that we can come into the next meeting running. Sorry to talk over you a little bit there, Paul.
Thanks, Gretchen. It's good to always let folks know what some of the next steps will be.
Is there always a reflection, or is that just something we just did this past time?
We have reflection as an ongoing practice throughout. So we've been doing bits of that each time, and we'll continue to do that in sometimes the same ways and sometimes different ways. Yes, I'm very sorry. we did not announce there'd be homework, but we're getting there now. And Judith, saw your question about meetings after June. This group is going to work through June, and then we're going to have some work just remotely with people reviewing, giving feedback to documents through July, but we won't have any meetings in July as a group.
We are anticipating a meeting in August, though, and we'll hopefully be able to give you more information about that by the time we end in June.
Yeah, that's correct. Thanks, Paul.
Wonderful.
Houston, you and Ed are killing me. I almost thought Ed wrote that comment about himself, and then I saw it was from you. Go group one. We're having a good time.
Okay, everyone. Thank you.
Wonderful.
We'll see you next week.